Hello and welcome to Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast with your host, Buddy Sotelo Esquire, and wrestling's premier photographer, Dr. Mike Leno. Well, we were going to have a full set tonight, but a couple of cancellations leaves us with just the two of us.
Well, we should say it's the day before Labor Day, and folks are out and having parties and sleeping in or
But
going.
Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast must go on, despite everyone taking the day off and weekend off.
Let me say this as a framework for the show, because I just got an email from Les Thatcher, who I've known since like 1972. He used to send me programs and results and everything when he was wearing many hats in Atlanta in the 70s, besides wrestling, besides producing the program, I think helping Ole book and all of that, because Les has been around since the 50s. That we lost Sonny King, Cool Cat Sonny King, most famous in New York City for Vince McMahon Sr., holding the Tri-WF tag titles with Chief Jay Strongbow. I believe they were the ones to beat King Curtis Iakea and Baron Mikulski Kuna for the titles. But Sonny did a lot of work for the Sheik in Detroit, and he came in for us. Vince Sr. sent him into Los Angeles in 1973.
He fought in the Bay Area, didn't he? He fought sometimes.
I don't think so. I think he might have come up and done one TV or something like that, but because Roy Shire in San Francisco used to job out even our name talent, like the guys that Sonny King used to face at that time, Butcher Brannigan, Dale Lewis, Pak Song when he was still a heel in L.A., and there was quite a few others like Colosso Colosetti, who did come up to L.A., to San Francisco for Shire, but I don't believe Sonny King really did. I'll check on that, but we are still talking about Afa and Sika. We lost Afa less than 2 months after his brother Sika died. We lost Kevin Sullivan. You, me, and Evan talked about Pete Sanchez and Pete Reeves, who were Tri-WF longtime enhancements. But Sonny King was...
Now add to that list, Psycho Sid, or Sid Justice, or...
Right, Psycho Sid Vicious. I was a little critical of him, but he did have charisma. He had the look and all of that. He was one of those body guys.
And he was a monster at the time when people really liked.
He was a really nice guy. He was a real character. I got to ride around with him when he worked for, he came in and did some stuff for Dennis Coralluzzo, facing King Kong Bundy on a big show that Dennis did in main event. And of course, he was at different fan fest. He was at that John Clark Philadelphia Wrestling Flyer convention in early 1992.
He suffered from one of the most gruesome injuries I ever saw. I remember watching it live. That was the problem. I remember seeing that match as it happened on TV. And what he did to his leg.
Who was he in the ring with? I forget. He was in the ring with Calloway or somebody else?
That's a really good... No, I think he was...
Oh, he was in WWF for Vince, and he did not want to do that move.
My thought was like Diesel. I mean, I'm thinking he was up against Kevin Nash at the time. I think it may have been Scott Hall.
After that, that was when he returned to the WWF. So he had 2 tours of WWF, and actually 2 for WCW, because he came back in and was part of doing something or other with Jeff Jarrett. This was kind of
he was jumping off the top rope, which is something he never did. That was a really unusual move for him. He was very obviously 90% of the time, ground bound and like lifting people up and slamming them and stuff. I mean, it's like, Snitsky and like, all these other, Dan Spivey. And in fact, I really loved him as a tag team member of the Skyscrapers with Dan Spivey and Teddy Long.
That was Spivey originally was in the first Skyscrapers incarnation with
The Undertaker. Yes. Yeah, and I love that team too. Then The Undertaker went in, Calloway went to the WWE and Sid took his place, but I thought they were just as vicious or just as mean, just as awesome as the Skyscrapers with Sid as they were with Mark Calloway or The Undertaker. I mean, I thought that in some ways he was maybe a little bit better suited for that as Mark was ready to go on to his solo career, whereas Sid, I thought that was really the only major tag team he was a part of. If you think about his work as overall as a wrestler.
I saw him at some house shows in Oakland and San Francisco where he was teamed with Flair. They were the heels against, I think, Hogan and Piper as the baby faces.
Yeah, but that was just a one-off to just,
know. They toured around the circuit. They did the same house show match everywhere.
Right, but it didn't have that wasn't, set for a long period of time. He held the world title a couple times and, was in some video games and, wasn't the kind of guy I think that the WWE was really comfortable like marketing in the same way that they did like the Ultimate Warrior. Obviously Hogan was the big symbol for the company for so many years. And then they, flirted around with who could carry the company after Hogan. And obviously Bret Hart was a guy that worked well, but only
circumstances dictated with performance enhancement drugs and the case, it wasn't the FBI, but I forget if it was the DEA against Vince, that court case that they should have won, but they screwed it up, and Jerry McDivitt slam dunked Vince's attorney on that. But they had to then go with smaller, whatever you want to call it,
out, yes,
nutty guys, and they went with Bret and Shawn, and it elevated business, and Flair was a part of that, dropping the title to Bret. So there were a lot of good things going on that came out as a result of these big monsters that sometimes kind of plotted around, folks talk about, like, it's a shame because I think, like, say, for example, Warlord, before, when he was in WCW, he was, he could really do a lot of stuff as the Powers of Pain, but when he got to WWF, it was like the brakes were put on his body.
What about like Dino Bravo? What about Dino Bravo?
Bravo was a shame because this was a guy, I saw him prior in Montreal, prior to him coming into Los Angeles in the mid-'74, and he was a high flyer. He was about half the size that you saw him, when he was, whatever you want to call it. We could, pet it out in performance enhancement in WWF. And it was a shame because before that, the fantastic team with Gino Brito in both Grand Prix and then
when he disappeared for a little while and he came back and he was gigantic. I mean, you really looked at him and said, oh my God. I mean,
everything, trapezius muscles and all that stuff. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, you looked like somebody blew him up with a balloon. I mean, he was I was almost comical. It was almost like in a cartoon when you see the little guy eat, like Popeye eat the spinach, and suddenly, his muscles get muscles on top of muscles. Or like what we saw with, I was thinking about this too, about Scott Steiner. I was watching some stuff about Scott Steiner and, Big Pop. The difference between what he was as Scott Steiner versus Big Papa Pump, and how obnoxious he was as Papa Pump and how likable he was as Scott Steiner. The Papa Pump era of Scott Steiner is not one of my favorites.
No, I mean, I was lucky enough to have seen him and was there at a lot of TVs and then shot him in Japan when he and Rick teamed against Hashi and Sasaki. March 21st, 1991 at the Starrcade in Tokyo, New Japan versus NWA/WCW, where it took him like 30 tries to cough out a promo. He later would become much better doing promos as a heel, in like 96, 97 on. But this was the Scott Steiner that I think was a lot more natural, shall we say, and he was a very quick, speedy, excellent worker. They even talked of maybe putting the strap on him, having Flair drop to him. That didn't happen. The match, for whatever, we were all expecting a lot from it. I think it was like 1990, Flair against Scott Steiner, and this was dark-haired, regular, normal Scott Steiner, and it was, It didn't. It wasn't disappointing, but it wasn't like I guess they were figuring with all of his high flying that he could do at that time. It was going to be more, like between a 4 and 5 star, however you want to term it. But he was just excellent technician at that time. The pre-heel, the regular, normal Scott Steiner, all the way until
pre-pump.
Yeah, pre-pumped.
Yes, pre-pumped was more easy. Yeah, but yeah.
We lost so many folks. We just talked about Sid and Sonny King, Cool Cat Sonny King, who I think passed yesterday. And thanks to Les Thatcher for letting everybody know.
We just had the 1-year anniversary of the death of Terry
Sullivan. It's we've had so many deaths, and Pete Reeves and Pete Sanchez. We had so many deaths in like a 1 month period of time.
And we just had the 1-year anniversary of when Terry Funk died.
Yeah, that's a big one. I almost say from an entertainment standpoint, because Flair's matches, love Flair, photographed him all over the world, in Canada and the U.S. and obviously Japan on a couple of tours. But I think Terry Funk is, if we're taking them out of the realm of the Lou Thesz, Billy Robinson, Carl Gotch types, the gods of Japan in terms of mat and chain and everything else beyond hooking, shooting capabilities and in-ring excellence, Terry Funk was he and Buddy Rogers, I think, just narrowly over Ric Flair as the two greatest performers, athletes I ever saw.
Flair would go ahead of Terry, in my opinion, but then Terry's right there. Terry is right there.
The promos, the innovation, the mind.
I'm not putting Terry Funk down. I'm saying that they're really a 1 and a 1A. I mean, you can't really tell the story of Terry Funk without having Ric Flair be a big part of it. You can't really tell the story of Ric Flair without Terry Funk being a big part of it.
In Terry Funk's case, I would talk about Dusty Rhodes. I'd talk about Dory Jr.
You talk about Ric Flair.
Guys, like, look at that tag match. If you go, and I think it's online, this tag match I've talked about on this show many, many times, the Funk Brothers against Gene Kiniski team with Jack Briscoe at Wrestling at the Chase on television, free television. It is an insane match. Terry's the star of that match, as he was the matches I thought that he had with Flair. That one from 1989.
The I Quit match is still talked about.
Yeah, he drove Flair on the table. That was the first time anybody saw that. Terry stole that match. He was just outstanding. And man.
Yeah, it's been a tough road without him. It's, you don't lose legends like that and replace them every day, and
that guy was so unique. There's no replacing. There's 1,000,001 Flair knockoffs, including one of those guys that's on the Jobber tag team in AEW right now that is trying to be a Flair sort of.
That's how influential he is. Imitation is the highest form of flattery.
I've asked him before, and he said yes. It gives him a real thrill. Anywhere in the world, when somebody does the chop, even in Japan, they do the woo, the Flair woo.
It's true. That is, yes. The Flair woo is part. It's not only part of like wrestling. It's sort of part of popular culture. I mean, you can do a woo in like a football stadium, and people know who it is. And you can do it in a basketball.
I'll give you that on Flair. Flair is like a national treasure, where NFL players, NBA players like imitate him, do the everything from the rhymes, kiss stealing, wheeling dealing stuff. All of that, and they do the woos, so he's recognizable when he goes to ESPN awards and everything. Where Terry wouldn't have been. But Flair really wasn't. The only movie Flair was ever in was he jobbed in Vern Gagne's The Wrestler. This was not the more recent The Wrestler movie with Mickey Rourke, but this was in 1973. It was packed. I urge anybody and everyone, go back and check out those 1973 movies. We had like 3 come out within about a year's time of each other. Maybe a little bit more for the Sheiks. I Like to Hurt People, which is also really a fun watch. Dusty Rhodes.
I watched that in the early days of videotape. I remember getting I Like to Hurt People.
Awesome. But you have this Vern Gagne, The Wrestler movie with Ed Asner playing the promoter. Oh man, it's got everybody in it. It's got the Texas Outlaws, Dusty and Dick Murdoch against Bruiser and Crusher, and oh man, it's got pretty
And
much.
Paradise Alley with Terry Funk. That's the other wrestling movie that from that era, and that has Terry Funk in it.
Paradise Alley. No, I was going to say Vivian Vachon's The Wrestling Queen. That is outstanding. If you want to see really top women wrestlers, that came out about 73, 74. But Paradise Alley, I think, came out in 78, 79 after Rocky won, the first Rocky. And also Henry Winkler doing the Gorgeous George thing in My One and Only.
The One and Only, yes.
The Guerrero Brothers. There was a ton of wrestlers in that, but nothing like the Paradise Alley Stallone one, where Terry Funk was the lead heel, but you see Kid Salami, Stallone's brother character, hip tossing Don Leo Jonathan, Ray Stevens, Piper, I think Chavo, just a million wrestlers, one after another in a frantic scene. But where are you going to get Ray Stevens and Gene Kiniski, two of the greatest legends who ever lived, within seconds of each other on camera? I urge everyone to go check out any and all of those movies. Also, we caught The Odd Couple had some famous 70s roller derby and roller games ladies on an episode where I forget what it was. The policeman character who later was whatever his name was, Arnold on Happy Days, and died, and they replaced him.
Ed Molinaro, Al Molinaro.
Yeah, a really super sweet guy. But when he died, how did they explain his death on Happy Days? Did they just insert the guy from Karate Kid to be Arnold?
Yeah. They actually no. It was the guy. Pat Morita was on first, and they substituted him for Al Molinaro. Al Molinaro was on the show till it ended, and then he died. About 10 years after the show.
He was becoming re-becoming, because he already was a star, and then he kind of slummed it a bit doing Happy Days. But I forgot, somebody left, but they didn't really explain. Okay, we have another Arnold here.
Yeah, well, it's because seriously, the Pat Morita character on Happy Days, the early part of it is like some of the most politically incorrect, like Asian stuff that you'll want to find.
We want to see the absolute worst, most un-PC, awful.
No, I think we can. Yeah, we want to stay on. We want to stay on the air with Facebook.
Pretending to be a Japanese guy with giant buck teeth. It was really despicable. I forget what movie that was in.
Well, I think you're thinking of Breakfast with Tiffany.
Yeah, that was
Breakfast at Tiffany's.
However, then if you want to see the counter, if you want to see Mickey Rooney's greatest role, I think it was The Black Stallion. Besides the stuff he did in the 30s and early 40s with Judy Garland, the Black Stallion movie that Francis Ford Coppola did, is a hell of a movie.
Yeah, well, it's the. Of course, we can talk about you'd already talked about Chief Jay Strongbow and all the other, Native American tropes, that were around, and the Japanese tropes.
If that was Vince Sr.'s idea to make an Italian American who came up from Florida, where he was teaming with Eddie Graham to become Chief Jay Strongbow, whatever year that was, I think late 71. But he got over, and
hey, I played an Italian as Buddy Sotelo. I'm not really Italian, but a lot of people growing up thought I was Italian. And they always thought I was an Italian from New York. So I said, if I ever play a character in wrestling, I'll make my character an Italian from New York. And I always thought that was funny, but, certain people who are Italians from New York may not think it's as humorous, but, whatever. Hey, Sergeant Slaughter was never in the military.
There's not any of that stereotypic stuff. I had to slog through, as others did in the 60s and 70s, evil Japanese, evil Russians, evil Germans. We even had evil
Canadians.
No, listen to this. That was later. Evil French Foreign Legion character.
Oh, yeah. The French evil guy, sure.
Rene Goulet.
I remember Rene Goulet.
Rene was in a tag team that worked for Dick the Bruiser, and it was him with Donnie Fargo, who was not French in the least. Donnie Fargo, who played Jackie Fargo's brother, And
The Australian Kangaroos weren't from Australia.
the Fabulous Kangaroos were. Roy Heffernan and Al Costello were, but not
No,
the second.
Al's not from Australia.
Al Costello. Nope, he was from Australia. He was. He was legit. That first Fabulous Kangaroos, and then the other team that came about in the 70s, the Royal Kangaroos, they were both from Australia. But yeah, I think you're thinking of Don Kent. So when Roy Heffernan missed Australia and quit the group, which included first Wild Red Berry as the manager, then George Crybaby Cannon took over, and Al Costello formed the team with Don Kent, who had like an American accent. He wasn't Australian whatsoever. So I think that's what you're thinking about.
The fake kangaroo, yes. They had the fake kangaroo.
Kangaroo. Now you see, at least in both WWE, AEW, and a lot of promotions, people legitimately...
And my brother will not let me, forgive me if I forget, Jimmy Jack Funk, which was really Jesse Barr. But remember, he put a mask...
of Beetlejuice. Oh, gosh.
Yeah, but remember...
Barr, Beetlejuice's brother, and he was the son of Jesse Barr, who helped Don Owen run Portland.
Right, but remember, they put a mask on him, and they called him he was Jimmy Jack Funk, even though he had nothing to do with the Funk family. They just threw him in there with a mask.
There were so many fake brothers. The few legit brothers, like the Funks and the Briscoes, always stood out. And then Mark and Jay Briscoe, they stood out. Any of these legit brother teams, we haven't had a whole lot of females other than the Bellas. Can you believe that the one Bella twin who married that guy, whatever his name is, from Dancing with the Stars, I guess he got physical with her, and she took off her wedding ring. The guy was arrested and all that stuff. So that's sad because...
You're right, though. It's very interesting that there are no sister tag teams or sisters.
Slated to Nikki Garcia's her real name, slated to marry John Cena, and then that didn't work out at the nth hour, and she married.
Well, I think their 15 minutes of fame is pretty much run out. I think they both the Bella twins both owe everything that they have to wrestling, and yet wrestling really messed their lives up pretty good too.
I feel bad for their mother because she was married to Johnny Ace, John Laurinaitis, and then he got in all that trouble with Vince. So I don't know what's going on with that. And then they seem
that whole trial was held over, and who knows when it's going to move forwards. Could be years. Vince is going to try to bury it and just wait till he's dead, and then it's going to all just fall apart probably. He's not that far.
I think it's Netflix that's airing the 4-part Vince McMahon special documentary sometime very soon, in a couple of weeks.
They are. I don't think they'll ever really be able to tell the story of Vince McMahon till after he's dead, and after they've already started digging the skeletons out of his closet. And I think, unfortunately, Mike, you and I are going to be dead before they get everything, the truth, out of what the whole story of Vince McMahon. In fact, they probably will never get the true story out of Vince McMahon.
Maybe not him, but I don't know.
He's buried so many things, like Trump. So many.
That's why I urge people that, people my age that may have been turned off and are not watching WWE's TV. I think you'll like what Hunter is doing with the booking. Things are logical. There's long-term storytelling, which is very good.
There's some that's good, and there's some that's pretty moronic. I do think the friendship bracelet thing that they had going on with
the story of that, it had his dog's name, who's been an important character in his life, who's brought up all the time, and then of course AJ Lee, his wife, on it. So, that feud is still ongoing, which has been
kind of silly and soap opera-y. It's kind of soap opera-y. It's not one of my.
That's what wrestling is. It's soap opera for guys, even though women, like it. It shouldn't be typified that way. Women like it, but it's soap opera, male soap opera, or whatever, in the context of using athletics as sort of a conduit to get from point to point. I think in Vince's era, if you could just have the guys cut promos and have less wrestling, and now thankfully we have more. You're even allowed to say the word wrestling or the word referee instead of
Title,
official, or saying the word hospital instead of a medical
belts.
facility. All that stupid shit.
It
I
just,
don't.
yeah. Well, it was like 400 pages of stuff that you couldn't say and
Or
things that you couldn't
had
do.
to start with the word wrestling unless it was WrestleMania because he wasn't about to change the golden goose. At
Yeah,
least in,
and it got so much that nobody could speak in any kind of a natural sense at the WWE because you get reprimanded because you said something that was part of that 400-page manual that you weren't supposed to say. I mean, it was so apparently just having even any conversation at WWE headquarters was like walking through a minefield. According to people that were working.
yeah, people were on eggshells, and now people like Bully Ray, Bubba Dudley, say when they go backstage and stuff, people are relaxed. There's none of that. So it's been good that he's gone. He was in it, at least in the opinion of some, a little too long, and the last minute booking where everybody is in tune with a script, and then like a half hour before the show he throws it all out and changes it. But let me go. I want before I forget, some guys like Kevin Sullivan. I forgot to, when we were talking about him on our tribute show a couple of shows back, about his time with Jim Cornette and Smoky Mountain Wrestling. You look at the folks that came in there, and Sullivan would pop into Smoky Mountain as well as ECW. And I got to cover a lot of that, but particularly him teaming and feuding with Cactus Jack, Mick Foley in ECW. But they both were in Smoky Mountain, and this Kevin really was such a brain. And if you can imagine him booking with somebody on his level like Jim Cornette, that stuff. I urge people, go back and look at Jim Cornette's Smoky Mountain. All excellent stuff.
I think that for me, Kevin Sullivan was the first guy that really tapped into the occult plus wrestling connection, which has been pushed further since then. But that army of darkness that he had, the whole concept.
It's revolutionary because that's the kind of the last few years we got to see a Florida Championship Wrestling. It was not as good as the stuff I got to see in the 70s when it was just packed. You had, Bill Watts and the Funk Brothers and the Briscoes and so many pieces of talent. You had Bob Orton Jr. in the openers. You just had a
But that army of darkness that he had together with him, which, had some.
It wasn't really, you look at Chris Colton, he did similar stuff, but in different places on a much lower key level. And Kevin Sullivan was doing this, and everybody around the world was, looking at it and commenting.
Yeah, and he had the Fallen Angel, which was one that,
Bob Roop, Mark Lewin, King Curtis Iakea. I think I'm leaving.
Sometimes a missing link would be there. I think he had Jake the Snake Roberts and King Kong Bundy.
Roberts.
Bundy show up. So,
Jake Roberts was one of those guys. Too. There was some genius there because that was pre-WWF Jake Roberts.
Right. No, you look at that Army of Darkness. That was like kind of a breeding ground of heels for that early part of that 80s time frame. That they all went on to be pretty big deals, throughout the WWE and NWA.
Lewin and Bob Roop were big deals, many years prior to that. But it helped launch Luna Vachon, one of the sweetest people. I miss her a lot. Great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great friend. She was the sweetest. When I would get up and speak at different Cauliflower Alley things before I would say whoever I was giving a plaque to or whatever, I would point out Luna if she happened to be in the audience and just throw her flowers because I didn't know how much longer she might have.
It's unfortunately, you look back even on you go and you look at the WrestleMania 1 card, okay, other than Hulk Hogan, pretty much and Tito Santana and Greg the Hammer Valentine, I guess, almost everybody else is dead from that card. You know,
Beefcake is still around.
Oh yeah, British Beefcake.
Right. There's absolutely a whole Buddy
Bruce
Rose.
is lucky to be alive, by the way.
I have no idea why Buddy Rose had a name. Why against was it Tito Santana or Steamboat that they had to put a mask on Playboy Buddy Rose, which was crazy because he had an act.
It was against Tito Santana. He was the executioner.
Wyndham is still around, Mike Rotundo, but we lost both Volkov and Iron Sheik. So many guys, obviously Orndorff, Snook, Piper.
Big John Studd, Andre the Giant.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, just the floor unfortunately littered with so many, you know, of those guys that, you know, Junkyard Dog and so forth, you know, guys that were all.
Let me think about that because now British Bulldog or Dynamite Kid, Tommy Billington, the great person, had some demons at different points. Wasn't on WrestleMania 1, but he was on the second and, you know, the third, obviously.
I love British Bulldog so much. In fact, I've been going through.
I'm talking about Davey Boy. I'm talking about Dynamite Kid. And
yes.
Nephew does a perfect. If anybody can replicate him and look like him facially and do some of that stuff in the ring, it's Tom Billington, you know, as his nephew. And he's on AEW television, particularly when they went to Wembley and went into TV, you know, about a week ago in England for the Dynamite show and the tapings of their other ancillary shows, Rampage and Collision. He's very impressive. He gets better every time I see him. And a guy who doesn't get a lot of credit is our friend Court Bauer, who I've known well over 30-some, you know, maybe 35 years. Court Bauer promotes this newer second incarnation of MLW. He started MLW way over 20 years ago on Florida Sunshine Network. But Court Bauer has given jobs and elevated MJF. That was the first place people saw MJF. This Dynamite Kid and some of his relatives. He had Teddy Hart, you know, gave him work for a good year. Brian Pillman's son, Brian Pillman Jr., and also Tony Schiavone. People forget Tony Schiavone was gone since 2001 from wrestling announcing. He was brought back after a couple of decades by Court Bauer to do his commentary, and then AEW snapped him up after however many months, maybe a year that he did announcing, and he got back into, you know, verbal shape with Court Bauer. So I want to throw some.
I have a side story there. You mentioned Teddy Hart. I do have a side story about Teddy Hart. Teddy Hart borrowed my knee pads. Do you remember that Teddy Hart
came in and did that one show because he and I were close, had it out at different points. He shows up out of the blue with this blonde gal that he brought down from Calgary. I think he was coming
over. This was all over at APW.
Yeah, well, he just did the one shot.
I know.
Only. But he came.
He didn't have enough gear with him. He didn't have knee pads. He wanted to do these high flying moves, and like nobody at APW had another set of knee pads. I was the only one who had a set of knee pads.
Did you get them back?
Yeah. So I can say that my knee pads have been worn by Teddy Hart. So I actually can say that. That's I still have them.
I want to say this, putting aside whatever alleged issues and the stuff, they did some documentary on him. He had so much talent in ring.
He did.
Really was exceptional. And he was on when he came into APW. But I mean, I saw him. I was there for all of the Wrestling Society X when he was teamed up with Dynamite Jack. Well, not Dynamite, that other Jack Evans, but the more recent Jack Evans, who was in AEW. A tremendous team. They worked for AAA. I think that's kind of where Conan and Vampiro discovered them, at least.
Well, let me say this to all you kids out there. Wherever you go, whenever you're at the gym, always bring all your gear with you. So in your car, always have stuff, because if I hadn't brought my knee pads, I wouldn't have this cool story to say about Teddy Hart and knee pads. So always remember, bring all your gear, kids, every time you go to the gym.
I have a funny story about Teddy, and he wouldn't mind me telling this one. And he's come to a couple cauliflower alleys and stuff.
Don't think he listens to the show, so I think you're safe.
You never know. Teddy came in for I was hired by Bruno Sammartino and his attorney at the time, Marty Lazzaro. They brought me in to both be the interviewer for Bruno's Legend series. They wanted a series of DVDs with Bruno interview with talent. So I suggested Pedro Morales. So we did one with Bruno and Pedro talking about their Shea Stadium 1 hour, not quite, but Broadway match, the first Shea Stadium outdoor mega show. And Bruno with Koloff and Morales passing the belt, and Bruno with Koloff alone, and others in the mix. We had Sean Stasiak representing his dad Stan, and a lot of talent. But so we ended up doing. So I post-produced all those DVDs, as well as was the guy interviewing all of the talent. Bruno with Dominic DeNucci, where they're talking about their world travels. It was world travels and road stories and ribs with them all over the place. But the last one we did at like midnight over a 2-day span, it was old school versus new school. So I had Bruno with all those older legends, including S.D. Jones, Dave Yohannan, who I hope we finally get on the show soon. Obviously Pedro Morales, Ivan Koloff, many guys taking on, and I had invited all of these guys, including Court Bauer, but I had Raven as the quarterback, Scotty Levy, Raven, Missy Hyatt, Francine, Chris Daniels, and Teddy Hart and Jack Evans. And so before we did that taping, we had, a fancy dinner for this last taping, and Teddy and Jack get in front of the table that Bruno and Pedro were at, and Koloff, and they do moonsaults off the table. And I remember Pedro Morales saying to Bruno, "What the F was that?" They did that to try to show off in front of these legends what I had them do in this last DVD was debate the state of the business. I had Bruno with all those great legends, including S.D. Jones and Ivan Koloff and Pedro Morales, Dominic DeNucci, many others, taking on all those, what I call new school. And this was about at least 25, 26 years ago.
Think about what the state of the business is now compared to what they were saying.
Teddy was funny, and I do have photos of Teddy with all of those legends, including Bruno. And I miss Jack Evans. For whatever reason, they got rid of him in AEW. He was teamed with Angelico, great team who teamed for quite a few years after the Teddy Hart team in Mexico, AAA, broke up. And you know what? On most people's cable system, I have a new AAA show is on Saturdays and Sundays. So wherever you are in the U.S., at least in the U.S., check your local listings for, it's called Lucha Libre AAA. It's only an hour on both Saturdays, and then it repeats on Sundays. But we finally get some AAA TV back. There's no CMLL, which used to be on Galavision channel, cable channel, back in the day, and used to be part of a 3-hour block. They'd have an hour and a half of CMLL, the oldest promotion in the world, classic CMLL, classic Lucha, and then 90 minutes of AAA. So outstanding stuff. But, all of these great AAA names, a lot of them you're seeing in AEW.
We are friends of the Lucha community since we had El Chupacabra on last week. Sorry you missed that interview.
Is he still wrestling?
Yeah.
Where, in the Sacramento arena? Sacramento arena?
Yeah, and with a completely replaced shoulder, which, I can't play. He's only a few years younger than I am, and still in the ring doing just incredible, crazy stuff. Which,
have the long hair and the makeup.
He does. Yeah, he still has the makeup stuff and all that. He's still going.
And, I remember him also. We had a lot of people forget. If I could just name some of the people who came into APW's garage. There was Jerry Lynn on his retirement tour. There was Sabu twice. There was Colt Cabana at least twice. Chris Daniels and Frankie Kazarian and all those guys. Many times. Samoa Joe teamed with Keiichi Sakota, who passed away. Oh, here's Tommy Cairo.
Brian Danielson.
Here's Tommy Cairo.
Oh, my.
Let's see if we can get him on. Tommy, we're nearing the end of the show. It's Dr. Mike. Russ said he worked on you. We'll just get you on. We're almost done because I got to go in about 5 minutes. We're almost done with the show, but Russ said he was emailing you and found your Skype and stuff. So I'll have Russ bug you, our producer, head of the show. But Tommy Cairo, at least we got a call from him. So we're hoping to get both. And we're doing this live. Tommy Cairo and Dave Yohannan, because Tommy, I don't even know if you know, we did the tribute and it was really going to be for the two Petes, Pete Sanchez and Pete Reeves. But we lost Arthur, and then Sid, Psycho Sid, and Kevin Sullivan. So we did a big tribute. So when we have you on, we'll talk about Kevin Sullivan, who obviously you worked with intimately in ECW, etc. But I get a text from Les Thatcher that Sonny King, who held Sonny King held the Tri-WF titles with Chief Day Strongbow, defeating King Curtis Iakea and Baron Skikluna, 72 for Vince Sr. And then Sonny King came out. He was with us about 9 months in Los Angeles, where he worked with John Tolis, Dale Lewis, Crazy Luke Graham. Yeah, Showboat Sonny King. He worked for the Sheik in Detroit too. In LA and Detroit, he worked as Cool Cat Sonny King. But Showboat Sonny King, he managed in like Tennessee. It's an awesome brother. It is horrific.
Let's say that for when he's on the show. He's actually on the show.
The show. So Tommy, Iron Man Tommy Cairo. Wait, you know what? He's sort of on the show. We will get him live, full voice.
Yeah, the real version of it.
Do you have anything you want me to plug before I have to sign off the show? Well, look for Tommy Cairo in ACW coming up. What is it called? Soul Championship Wrestling? Oh, Assault. 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 Assault Championship Wrestling. What else?
Well, hopefully you can tell us more about that when we have him on the show.
Oh, with Jason Knight. Oh, an old adversary. I mean, people remember Tommy Cairo with the Sandman, but Jason Knight, there was another one. Before I let you go, Tommy, I want to see if you work for Angelo Savoldi or Mario Savoldi, with all of those characters that he had, which is where Sandman and Dreamer and Zip, Zap, and Zoom and Curly Mo, a lot of colorful characters. But I think the Savoldis were the most colorful character behind the scenes.
All right. Well, you guys can continue your conversation. I think
I better go. Russ, I'm going to have Russ, a.k.a. heel manager Buddy Sotella, get a hold of Tommy Cairo to get him booked on the show. Maybe actually because, Russ, if you give him a call when we conclude, I think you could get him booked and walk him through Skype. So with that.
We'll work on that. All right.
So give him a holler if you can. Right after we're done, Russ, give him a holler. I'm signing off early so you can get a hold of Tommy. He's at home now. And the great Tommy Cairo, Iron Man Tommy Cairo, we hope to have him on maybe next week or the week after with fellow legend and Dave Yohannan, and we can get back to talking about some of these brothers we love. So for old Dr. Mike, I got to go. Russ, I'll have you close out the show. Please call the great Tommy Cairo.